Hello and welcome to the Big Switch webinar, Next Generation Data Center Security and Monitoring, discussing elastic cyber defense, container and cloud monitoring. My name is Greg Holzrichter and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Big Switch, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Joining me today is Doug Murray, President and CEO of Big Switch Networks, Prashant Gandhi, Chief Product Officer of Big Switch Networks, and John Fruehe, Senior Analyst of Moor Insights Strategy. As we go through the presentation, please feel free to ask questions using the Q&A box on your webinar dashboard. If you're watching this video in a rebroadcast or a recording, or you have questions on an upcoming webinar topic that you would like our panelists to address, please go to bigswitch.com/webinars and submit a question using the link provided. We've also provided you with handouts for today's session. You can download them from the Handouts tab on your dashboard. We have a full agenda for today's webinar, so let's get started. And our first speaker is John Fruehe, Senior Analyst at Moor Insights Strategy. John, over to you.
Thank you. I wanted to talk a little bit about businesses and how digital transformation is really changing the way that businesses are approaching. The focus today for so many customers is this idea of digital transformation. And it's all about taking all of that data that they have, all this new information that's coming available, and using that to really get ahead of the curve. We now have access to more information than we've ever had before. Things like IoT, big data analytics, mobility, social media, all of those are coming together, and they're allowing businesses to look at their problems from a different perspective. And actually, they're able now to correlate that data and drive insights. So instead of looking backwards at the old sales figures to figure out what you do next, you can start looking real time at what's really happening, what are the conditions on the ground, correlate those into decisions that can be made quickly. You'll see a lot of new applications that are coming out. Data is now being integrated from multiple sources. It used to be that we had a back-end database that carried all our transactions, and all we had to do was go through that, query it, and figure out what we needed to do next. But now you've got data coming in from multiple sources, be it weather feeds, social media, customer engagement. There's all kinds of information that's out there. And for customers now, they've got to be able to pull all this together. One of the big changes that's happening is that now deployments are starting to focus more on east-west traffic. Instead of a lot of the north-south that you traditionally saw in networking, you're seeing more east-west traffic. And that's really spawning leaf-spine networks. And people are starting to look at, how do I change my network? Because the old networks were really holding businesses back. With things like containers, microservices coming along, these are further complicating the networking world. And a lot of the workloads are now becoming more transient, spinning up and down instances where you need them, and being able to track what's happening from a networking and also from a security standpoint becomes much more difficult. In this kind of environment, we see that opportunities businesses want to capitalize on really revolve around data. And that's functionally changing what people are doing from a networking perspective. With servers being provisioned in under 30 minutes because of virtualization, network still sits at 90 days. Traditional networking is a bottleneck. And the server virtualization has really exposed this. Infrastructure on the networking side is far too physical. It needs to become more virtual. It needs to become more software defined. And security is ultimately the long pole in the tent. Most of the network provisioning is really tied to getting security right and getting the right sign-offs for security. So as you look at what can you do to change your networking, security is the first place to look. The number of threats are increasing, and the variety of threats are coming from so many different vectors that there's more pressure than ever put on IT. Next slide. To really change your networking, what you've got to do is step out of the last 15 years and how you've been doing things and start to think about, where does your business need to go. Focus on reducing the change with how IT used to look at their problems in the past. Now when they look at the problems, they need to be looking at things from a business direction. The sales numbers used to drive all the action, but now the broader market, what's really happening on the ground, is what's driving IT changes. In the past, you used to need a business case for why you were going to take something to the cloud. Now most companies that I talk to have it completely opposite. What they're really doing is setting up a cloud-first strategy, and you need a business case if you want to justify being able to bring something in on traditional IT at this point. Control over input has now become so important. It used to be transactional data and reporting. Now there's all these streams, all this input and analytics, and all of those pieces now come together and cause businesses to have to change how they look at their networks. Think about networks as they used to go from being data only to suddenly becoming data and voice. Now we're building in a lot of equipment, products, and things like that. IoT has a huge impact on this. As we see now, customers are integrating in their buildings, their control systems, or even the physical products that they're shipping out and putting in the hands of customers. With all of this customer information being added in, the cost for data breaches are going up exponentially. So it's really important that businesses look at not only what are they collecting and how are they using it, but most importantly, how are they securing it. Next slide. Now for years, businesses had to choose between two modes. You could either do deep analysis, and all of that was out of band. Take all the data, push it off to the side, analyze it while you had time, and then maybe you find something that sends you back into the stream to go try to correct that. Additionally, sometimes there was real-time analysis, things that could be done in line, but these were very light analyses. These were not things that were very in-depth, and they weren't very adept at changing when conditions on the ground change. So businesses had the choice of, I can either go deep or I can do things in real time. And with the increase in traffic, the increase in threats, and the increase in the criticality of all the information that they're dealing with now, or is no longer a choice. It has to be and. And so you're finding that with all of this meaningful data for a digital transformation, you've got to change your security model. The traffic and exploits are increasing. We saw the denial of service attack, and that was really the first attack that hit at the greater than the terabyte level. The Mirai IoT attack was also huge because it was an astronomically large number of devices that were all unsecured, all of these IoT endpoints that were now suddenly enacted to be able to go after and create that attack. So we're no longer able to just profile and say, and we've got to say that we've got to go after these things, not only driving greater security, but also protecting the data and protecting the business. Because all of these impacts really are about protecting your business. It's not just about securing a network. It's about making sure that you can drive and create the right environment to minimize any financial implication from a solution. This is why companies are looking for different ways to handle security and handle networking. This different approach is changing things, and in this environment, you've got to have an ecosystem and a partner with interoperability that has a standards-based approach to really drive everything forward. Now, one more slide. You'll see that there's a huge software-defined market out there. The software-defined data center is what a lot of analysts talk about, and everybody's a little off on what exactly that opportunity is. Is it 83 billion? Is it 139 billion? It's going to be huge. That's what we do know. And so take your eyes off of the numbers and focus on the strategy, because software-defined data centers are going to be the next generation of networking, security, and infrastructure that will be delivered to customers. And with that, I'd like to move it over to the next speaker.
Thanks, John. Really interesting insights and a lot of change going on in the industry. Next, we're going to have Doug Murray, President and CEO of Big Switch, discuss the drivers for next-generation data center networking.
Great. Thanks, Greg. And John, thank you for the interesting perspective relative to digital transformation. It's very clear to me that if you look at the data centers that are being built now and over the course of the next 5 to 10 years, they will look materially different than the data centers that traditionally we've built over the last decade. So it's an exciting time to be in networking. Before I jump in, just 2 quick thank yous. So the first is I want to take an opportunity to thank our customers. So our customers have really been at the core of what we do as a company, and we're growing very quickly as an organization. And so as I look at the customers that literally by the dozens are going into production as we work through each quarter, I want to thank them for putting their trust in Big Switch and joining us in the mission. So that's the first thing. The second is I also wanted to give a big thank you to the employees of the company here at Big Switch. It's incredible that the innovations that they put together, the architectures they design. But the thing that always impresses me about the way they operate is the emphasis on putting the customer first. And that's something for us which is very core to the values and core to the culture of the company. So I wanted to take an opportunity to thank both our customers as well as our employees. So with that, let's jump in. So if you look at what we do, so the focus of Big Switch is very clearly around disruption, and we get remarkably excited about this. The emphasis that we have is on being the next generation data center networking company. Now what does that mean? So when we start to unpack that, we look at things relative to next generation data center switching, so switching fabrics that represent new architectures for the physical switching infrastructure, so the production network, as well as next generation data center security and monitoring. And you can really look at that as the next generation network packet broker. So innovative approaches to multi-tenant fabrics to really help people more effectively secure and monitor their data center infrastructure. Now the purpose of this launch is very specific to the one on the right, which is Big Monitoring Fabric and next generation data center security. Prashant will cover this in detail, but just to give a top of the waves relative to the launch, there are 3 specific areas that we'll be highlighting. The first is the introduction of the BigSecure Architecture. And so just to level set with this up front, BigSecure as an architecture is really more a reference design. It's not a product per se, it's taking a series of products and putting them together to solve a very specific problem as it pertains to cyber defense. We do so in close partnership with companies such as A10 and Blue Coat, and again, this is a great way to look at the how to secure data centers and IoT from an infrastructure perspective with some of these emerging attacks. The second area is around monitoring any workload. So this includes areas such as on the VM side, API integration with vCenter. It also includes on the container side a lot of work that we're doing in the Docker space for things such as container-to-container monitoring. So that traffic monitoring becomes important in this new environment and ecosystem. And then lastly there, public cloud. So work where whether it's on-prem or whether it's in AWS, the ability to monitor things effectively both internal to the data center as well as in the public cloud. And then last but not least, the third thing is around Big Monitoring Fabric 6.0. This is now the next wave of our technology and release, and I will share just in terms of features and capabilities. It is the broadest or deepest release that we've done in the history of the company. So really just a remarkable amount of innovation that's gone into BMF 6.0. And again, Prashant will cover all 3 of these from a technology perspective in detail. Now, why the data center and why do we focus here first? So to a certain extent, what we do relative to software-defined networking and separation of hardware and software is something that arguably resonates in almost every facet of networking. It applies to campus, it applies to service provider infrastructure, it applies to the WAN and so forth. But as a company, we very thoughtfully and methodically focus first on the data center. We do so in many respects, as John was just highlighting, the data center, as we see data center and cloud, going through an incredible metamorphosis. And in one respect, the applications look very different than the applications of 10 years ago. And at the same time, in addition to the apps being different, the way people are employing technology, security is changing and continuously evolving. And so you bring those 2 things together, and it's a challenge when you look at how you build out network infrastructure in a data center. Then in parallel, you have all sorts of challenges with respect to time to market. So business velocity becomes important, where customers are no longer in a position where they can wait 12 to 18 months to deploy applications. They need to do so much more efficiently and expeditiously. And then from an innovation perspective, they need to do so with budgets being flat or arguably declining. So when you look at CIOs and people running network organizations, quite complex. And ironically, the network has now become the bottleneck. If you look really in the last 10 to 15 years, what's happened in networking is the boxes just got faster. And with the infrastructure getting faster and going from 10.100 to gig to 10 gig and so forth, that typically solved most of the pain. Now, unfortunately, because of the applications, the scale, the move to cloud, cybersecurity, everything that's going on in the data center, Going box by box is no longer acceptable. And as a result, the networks end up being way too complex and incredibly fragile. And so the network really does become the challenge. And so as a result, we believe that a next generation data center network is necessary, both in the network itself as well as how you monitor it, how do you secure the traffic and analyze flows. Our customers tell us they want simplicity. They tell us they want choice with respect to how they deploy applications and how they deploy their networking architecture. So we believe this is a very important part of what the next generation data centers will look like in the coming 5 to 10 years. Now, if you look at what John was saying before about software-defined data center, it's clearly an incredibly large TAM. What we do is as a company, we make sure that we look at not only specific product segments within the data center, but then micro segments relative to use cases. As it pertains to the next generation data center switching, our Big Cloud Fabric product, which was shipped in 2014, is the flagship in that space. Big Cloud Fabric focuses on two very specific areas. The first is with respect to VMware use cases. So making sure that we optimize for people that don't necessarily want to use command line interface or necessarily are CCIEs. People that really want to do effective integration with their VMware assets. This could be orchestration via NSX, it could be in vSphere, it could be work done relative to vSAN. But doing things such as managing your switching infrastructure from VMware is something that we see very compelling with a lot of our customers today as they're deploying. In addition, a great deal of emphasis on OpenStack. So we believe that we're the best networking option for OpenStack, and we do so now at scale not only with enterprises but with carriers. On the monitoring fabric side for VMF, the two focus areas are pervasive visibility, so areas such as tap every rack and LTE monitoring, as well as DMZ-based security, so service chaining at the DMZ. Now, if you look at the architecture itself, so this is really core to what makes us different as a company. It's really core to the heart of the architecture of Big Switch, is we believe that everything that we build from a technology perspective has to adhere to three design principles. The first, and very importantly, back to the early days of the company and the initiative that came out of Stanford in the 2009-2010 era. Everything we do is about fabrics. It's about using SDN control software, so separation of hardware and software and having it such that you manage everything logically as one big switch. And so that the concept of using an SDN controller, having automation and simplicity at that layer and that visibility is, and from an analytical perspective, becomes remarkably important to us. The second thing that we believe in is that customers deserve choice. And when we look at it, we believe that customers have really the ability and the need to get open network hardware, meaning their choice and flexibility with respect to what physical appliance they put the software on. So this could be switches from companies like Dell or Acton, Quanta, and many others over time. And so having flexibility and choice with respect to deployment is also important. And then lastly, the ability to do scale out, pay as you grow. So really simplicity with respect to how you not only install networks initially, but then how you troubleshoot and then how you scale them out over time. So making sure that you have that simplicity as well becomes important. So these three are very core to the intellectual property of the company, and in many respects is where a lot of our differentiation resides. Now, one thing that we've been thrilled with is the adoption and the growth that we've seen in the install base over the course of the last 12 to 18 months. Now, I'll share the customer adoption and the mind share that we're getting has been remarkably impressive. And if you look as an example here, it says our annual software subscriptions, because we're a pure play software company, grew 267% year over year last quarter. And so for prospective customers that are on the webcast today, I invite you to try BSN Labs, or even more importantly, try to do a proof of concept with us. We see statistically when people do a proof of concept with us, they end up becoming a customer over 80% of the time. And that's because they really embrace the vision and the architecture. Also, if you're a prospective customer, know that you're not the first one to cross the chasm. We have customers in the financial services vertical, we have carriers, we have big Fortune 100 companies that are now doing this, in some cases in smaller configs like 2 to 4 racks, and in others doing it across hundreds of racks, like our partnership with Verizon. And so we're building out an incredible install base of customers and remarkably proud of the customers who are partnering with us on this journey. And so importantly, we look at things not just as SDN and architectures, but again, very granularly with respect to how people deploy the technology. From a big monitoring perspective vantage point, Prashant's going to cover the architecture in detail, but just to level set, we focus on DMZ-based security, so look at that as inline service insertion. Anyone that's managed a DMZ knows how complex that is when you're managing a multitude of tools that are sitting at the DMZ. And doing so by programmatically allowing people to effectively do service insertion and manage inline flows at the DMZ is really something we see as a differentiator for Big Switch. On the visibility side, this is really core to the foundation that the company started when we released VMF back in 2013. The focus here is really on use cases such as monitor or tap every rack. It's around monitoring LTE networks and doing so at massive scale. And really, in that case, it's about driving down the operational costs as well as the CapEx so that our customers can invest more of their dollars in the tools themselves as opposed to the network itself relative to connectivity. So it's about optimization of flows and getting it off from the production network to the monitoring network and doing so in the most multi-tenant and cost-effective form. And this is, again, really at the core of how we built the VMF business and have been continuing to evolve sub-use cases around that over the last 2 to 3 years. On the BCF front, as we focus on VMware and OpenStack, we're seeing very innovative use cases and deployments. One I'll call out as it pertains to VMware. For those of you that attended VMworld a few months ago, Moor Research, which is a customer that's based in Japan, spoke extensively with respect to how they're leveraging both vCenter and NSX in partnership with Big Cloud Fabric and how that has helped from a network automation vantage point. So being able to have that whole ecosystem work together has been incredibly successful for them in their data centers across Japan. We have some customers such as Dubai Municipality in the Middle East that are using us for use cases not only for VMware but also for OpenStack, so using both technologies and the same physical properties. On the OpenStack side, customers like Verizon have been quite broad and public with respect to their use case, and it's really about driving operational simplicity. And as many of you know that have used OpenStack, OpenStack is quite complex, and similar to what we see in other areas, clearly the network is the bottleneck. And we believe that from an architectural perspective, when you look at the work that we do with both Red Hat and Mirantis, that our differentiation is that from an OpenStack perspective, it works and it works at scale. And as we look to carriers and large enterprises that are deploying worldwide, we see that resilience and an integration in terms of OpenStack and future revs of OpenStack become remarkably important. And of course, we have other use cases such as in the container space where we're doing a lot of thought leadership and initial innovation. So stay tuned for more on that in the coming months. So as I wrap this up and get ready to turn it over to Prashant again, I'm remarkably impressed with the innovation that the team is building. I'm really proud of the technology and excited about the use cases and the framework that we're building. So with that, Greg, back to you and really getting deep with Prashant relative to the innovation that we're bringing to market today.
Fantastic, Doug. Thanks so much for that overview of next generation data center networking. And with that, we're going to go deeper now into the technology, and I'll turn it over to Prashant Gandhi, the Chief Product Officer. Prashant, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Doug. Thanks, Greg. You know, in some ways, if we look at an analogy of cars, and Doug, you have used this very effectively in the past, is, you know, there is a transition from gasoline engine to an electric car, and essentially we are focused on bringing that level of transformation in networking. How do we make that simple and operationally and automated in networking? So often, you know, the fact that we have products across monitoring and security and in data center switching, how do they relate with each other in an overall data center environment? And so what we have is a canonical framework of a data center where there are a variety of applications, physical, virtual, container applications, And one needs a network, and this is where Big Cloud Fabric is deployed. It's deployed in a pod formation, so it can be inserted in an existing data center along with a traditional box-by-box network. And customers have deployed this, for OpenStack, for VMware, as well as for general-purpose connectivity as data center fabric. Now, this environment needs to be monitored for application performance monitoring, network performance, security monitoring, and data recording. And for that, network packet brokers are deployed for the purpose of aggregating cap and span traffic and sending it to the tools. And this out-of-band visibility is provided by Big Monitoring Fabric, which is effectively a next-generation network packet broker. And finally, in the DMZ, customers deploy a variety of security tools, and these security tools need to be inserted inline, and a streamlined change management becomes very, very important across security team and the networking team. And this is where Big Monitoring Fabric inline is placed, and it enables very easy way to insert new security tools as well as carry on change management and send the right traffic to the right tools. So make the tools that are deployed in the DMZ very, very efficient. So today we are going to focus on the Big Monitoring Fabric, a portion of the product, and how we further enable monitoring and security with our new releases and the BigSecure architecture that we are announcing. So just as a context, traditional NPBs are box-by-box entities that have deemed to be complex to operate and very brittle, often lack visibility, very opaque. And because of the fact that they're built in a proprietary manner, there's no vendor choice for hardware, and it becomes very expensive to deploy these devices. And so the transformation that the Big Monitoring Fabric brings as a next generation NPB is really focused on the three principles that Doug talked about: the software control, open hardware, scale out deployment based on the fabric architecture. And this brings customers the level of simplicity, intelligence, programmability, agility, and certainly much lower cost. So for the same budget, customers are able to deploy a lot more of monitoring with this new architecture. The two use cases we have seen within visibility and security: monitor every rack. This is a use case that we pioneered for east-west traffic. Again, east-west traffic is 3 times, 4 times more than the north-south edge traffic. And so to be able to deploy more infrastructure and more traffic that needs to be monitored within the same budget, it becomes very difficult. And this is where Big Monitoring Fabric has really shined. We've extended these use cases to monitor every location, so branch locations, remote POPs, as well as monitor service provider for GLT networks. And today we're announcing or extending this visibility to container and cloud environment. And there is emergence, as John earlier pointed out, cloud native applications, and how does one continue to extend monitoring for these applications. We'll talk more about this in detail, and our approach will be leveraging API level interactions to enable dynamic monitoring of cloud native applications in containers and clouds. Secondly, very exciting to be able to announce the BigSecure architecture. We've seen these Mirai attacks that John pointed out. There's a burst of attack that is at very high bandwidth, upwards of terabit now. Tens of thousands, if not over 100,000 devices that get compromised, these IoT devices, and are leveraged in order to generate these attacks. And how does one withstand against such massive attacks that are not going to go down there, that are going to continue to intensify in an affordable manner? And so we'll talk about the BigSecure architecture that presents a framework, a blueprint to be able to do that, along with Big Switch products, as well as our partner products such as from A10 and others. And finally, Big Monitoring Fabric Release 6.0, and we'll talk about the exciting capabilities that are coming in this release. It's now a very mature product in its 6th generation of software cycle. So let's start with the first piece or portion of the product announcement, and that is monitoring every workload, whether it's a physical machine, virtual machine, container, or an application deployed in public cloud. So ability to provide visibility to any workload and wherever it resides, whether it's on-premise or public cloud environment. And to sort of kick this off, the first aspect that is on-premise is ability to monitor virtual machine environments. And there are several aspects to that. One is the virtual machine traffic can be between servers, or they can be between VMs within the same server. And so one needs to be able to monitor it in entirety. And today one can do that very easily by pre-provisioning the VM environment, such as the vSphere environment. What one can additionally do is to be able to integrate with VMware vCenter and dynamically create span sessions. So there are environments where customers choose to enable monitoring across VMs for the purpose of troubleshooting, for the purpose of performance monitoring when application performance issues are reported. And in that case, dynamics monitoring becomes very important. So this ability to interact programmatically with APIs across the two environments allows us to dynamically span the VM traffic from a server or across servers into the Big Monitoring Fabric environment so that tools have access to this traffic. And this is an important capability in the sense that the traditional suppliers of network packet brokers have opted to deploy an agent in every server. And this becomes very intrusive in the sense of now one has to do change management across network team or security team and the virtualization team. And these processes tend to be quite decoupled. And so bolting them together makes the whole operational experience very cumbersome and very complex. Secondly, these agents take cycles from the server, so it impacts the overall capex goes up. And additionally, each agent is priced on a per server basis, and therefore, if one has 100 servers, now suddenly the cost of monitoring the VM traffic skyrockets. So all of this is alleviated when one does it dynamically through API integration. The same philosophy and principle, we believe SDN brings the programmability aspect of SDN. What we have done so far is leverage it for within the Big Monitoring Fabric's own environment to program the switches and interact with the tools and the service node. What we see a tremendous potential for this to extend outward into third-party environments, whether they be orchestration systems, public cloud environments, or third-party tools. And you'll see that theme throughout the presentation today. So in the case of container environment, we apply the same principle, ability to do programming now across across container environment. So let's look at a couple of deployment models in containers. We've seen that customers often prefer to deploy containers in a VMware environment. Here, containers are embedded within a VM. And a different set of customers prefer to deploy containers or directly on a Linux host. And so independent of how the deployment takes place, through API interactions, whether it's a VMware environment, a Docker environment, Kubernetes environment, one is able to provision these environments dynamically and create dynamic span sessions that can traverse over a virtual switch, such as Open vSwitch and VMware vSwitch, and the traffic can be extracted by Big Monitoring Fabric into the monitoring fabric and over to the tools. So these are very exciting new capabilities that we are announcing. We believe that we are taking the leadership in extending the visibility and monitoring to containers. Customers are also using public clouds such as Amazon, AWS, and Microsoft Azure, and others. And so how does one deploy monitoring or extend monitoring to these environments? So our approach, again, is very similar, to take the big monitoring fabric, the fabric, and extend it to cloud environment, bring the traffic to that extended fabric in the cloud, and allow the flexibility to have that traffic monitored locally within an Amazon AWS VPC where the tools may reside, or allow the traffic to be backhauled to the on-premise monitoring environment so that they can be sent to the on-premise monitoring tools. The customers are now able to have a consistent experience. They're able to operate this through the same controller, whether it's an on-premise monitoring environment or off-premise monitoring environment in Amazon VPC, and offer a consistent monitoring policies, deploy these policies, and ensure that their workflows and operational practices remain similar wherever the workload resides. So with these new capabilities that we are demonstrating, we see visibility can be extended now ubiquitously, comprehensively across an enterprise, as well as across any workload that may reside on-premise as well as in any cloud environment. So with that, we'll jump into the BigSecure architecture. And this is the security, specifically DMZ security, is the second important use case of big monitoring fabric. And what we have done here is seen the customer pain point where within the DMZ, customers, in order to secure traffic and secure their environment from external threats, have the traffic go through a sequence of security tools. And inserting these tools is often very complex and cumbersome. Managing change management across security and networking becomes very, very, very complicated. And so what Big Switch has done is enabled an SDN fabric to be deployed within a DMZ to which the tools connect. So now it's very easy to insert tools. It is very easy to do change management across multiple operational teams within IT. And it is now very easy to send the right traffic to the right tool. And one can have tiered security policies where, depending on the service level, security service level, the traffic can be identified and sent to the right security tool chain. And we partner with companies on the tool side, A10 Networks, FireEye, Blue Coat, to be able to deploy this architecture within the DMZ. Now, the fact that we have an ability to redirect traffic and load balance that traffic across a variety of tools, we also have an ability to do enforcement in the fabric. And this has led to really the vision for BigSecure architecture. And interestingly, over the last few months, we are seeing this massive attack that John talked about, where attackers are compromising IoT devices such as surveillance cameras, digital video recorders, and originating attacks through those. So massively distributed. In the case of the attack on Dyn, it is reported that over 130,000 such devices were compromised, and over 1 terabit, 1.2 terabit of attack was generated toward the cloud provider. And so really the impacted organizations are folks who ingest large amount of traffic and offer internet-based services. Service providers, carrier customers, cloud providers, SaaS providers, Dyn, for example, being providing internet-based DNS service, managed security providers, as well as large enterprise organizations face this challenge. And this challenge is not going to go away. It is going to intensify as we move forward. And so what is a way to address this in an evolving manner so that as the threat landscape evolves, that the architecture is adaptable to that evolving threat. Secondly, that it is able to be available in an affordable manner when these attacks occurs, and then it can be activated when the attacks occur. So the insight here that we have for next generation defense is to be able to take an existing normal bandwidth attack environment and augment it with attack mitigation infrastructure that is elastic and that is comprehensive so that it can handle network attacks, compute attacks, or connection level attacks at very, very high bandwidth. And to be able to mitigate or kind of design a mitigation environment that allows ability to surge during high bandwidth attacks is that attacks can be network layers, so one needs network fabric. They can be packet layer, so one needs very high speed packet engine that can classify the payload of the packet and take actions. Connection level attacks that can that need more sophisticated tools, and such as virtual network functions or virtual versions of the tools that are deployed in the DMZ. Ability to do scale out architecture to manage high bandwidth attacks needs to be programmable so that it's dynamic and leverages industry standard commodity Ethernet and x86 hardware so that the upfront cost can be very low and manageable. So here is the framework that we believe addresses these requirements, and that framework is identified as the BigSecure Architecture. Within the DMZ, continue to leverage the best-of-breed tools that are provided, such as tools for denial of service attack, advanced threat protection, SSL decryption, IPS. An example is the DDoS threat protection system from A10 Networks. And so the tools would continue to detect attacks and continue to do mitigation of these attacks. As an attack is deemed now high bandwidth, the attack signatures now can be communicated to an SDN controller. In the case of BigSecure, that would be the Big Monitoring Fabric controller, which then programs the network as well as compute devices in order to do comprehensive mitigation. The networking fabric, the SDN fabric, this is terabit bandwidth fabric at line rate, and can mitigate network-based attacks. We have also packet blockers that do DPI inspection, so high-speed DPI engines in the form of Big Monitoring Fabric service nodes, as well as raw compute capacity available and connected to the fabric as NFV nodes, where virtual network functions can reside and address sophisticated mitigation of sophisticated attacks. So virtual form factors, VNFs, of the hardware appliances, tool appliances, can be available, can be elastically scaled, and the network fabric, the SDN fabric, continues to redirect the traffic, provide service insertion, service chaining, as well as load balancing. So this combination of best-of-breed tools, programmability through SDN controller, the SDN fabric, and the raw compute capacity provided by x86 in the form of DPI engines or NFV nodes together as part of the BigSecure architecture allow us to deploy a surgible high bandwidth mitigation and capability at very affordable cost. And here is the traffic flow that would be redirected or adjusted in the case of high bandwidth attacks. So when we have normal bandwidth, the traffic is service chained through the existing security tools. And when the attack is deemed high bandwidth, the controller reconfigures the service chain and redirects the traffic to, if the attack is deemed network-based, then to the switch fabric. If it is packet-based, it can be sent to DPI engines. And if it's even more sophisticated, then can be sent to the virtual network functions, which are elastically scaled and load balanced in order to gain that high bandwidth mitigation capabilities. So with this ability to do dynamic multi-layer mitigation, one is able to, with BigSecure, address high bandwidth attacks. And so we believe this is, an architecture that is also adaptable. So because it is fully deployable through software and it is programmable, that as the threats evolve, the attack signatures may evolve, but the same hardware that is deployed can be reprogrammed to have to address evolving threats. And so we are very excited with BigSecure. We will continue to partner with tool providers and others to be able to make this a reality as we move forward, and we look forward to providing more and more proof points as we integrate with our tool partners. So with that, let's now focus on a major release that we are currently in beta with, release 6.0. And release 6.0, we have focused on advances in advanced capabilities for services, the packet inspection-based services, as well as analytics. And so first, we've been shipping a service node that provides packet modification capabilities for Big Monitoring Fabric at 40 gig bandwidth. We are now announcing a significant increase in performance, 160 gig, with a new service node that will be available in release 6.0. And service nodes are fabric nodes, so they attach to the fabric, and the lifecycle management of the service node is exactly as if it is another node in the fabric. The upgrade, the management, the policy configuration, everything is done through controller, and so there is no additional operational overhead. We are announcing 3 new services. So we've supported today deduplication, packet slicing, and DPI filtering. With NetFlow generation, customers are now able to provide flow level visibility, leveraging best-of-breed tools for NetFlow collection. Header decapsulation, so tunnel traffic can be made visible, and ability to mask content within a packet such that personally identifiable information can be now masked. And next is visibility, and this is really, we've talked about, what level of intelligence we bring into this next generation networking devices. We've talked about intelligence from programmability perspective, intelligence from services perspective at packet level and deep packet inspection level, and visibility, telemetry that is provided for a variety of reasons, that capacity planning, performance measurements of the fabric itself, ability to visualize what type of applications and end nodes are available on the production infrastructure, and ability to have visibility to some level of security. Who are the users? Where is the traffic flowing? Which geographies the traffic is emerging or destined to? Do I have validated DNS and DHCP servers on my network, or do I have a rogue DHCP server that has shown up on the network? All of this visibility is now provided on Big Monitoring Fabric's analytics module. And what I wanted to do is to show the workflows that customers leverage in order to fully consume the capabilities of analytics. So let's look at the DNS dashboard. We provide a variety of dashboards, including control plane traffic, DNS provides, there is a surge in DNS traffic. You can see that very clearly. What are the top hosts that generate that, and what are the domains that these hosts are trying to reach to? So such information is very easily available in analytics. Another example, when users are reporting connectivity problems, one can look at the dashboard to say, where do I have incomplete connections that are taking place in the network? Which are the clients having the most problems? Which are the servers that they are communicating with, or applications that they are communicating with? And is there a way for one to see the time series of these issues and see anomalies that occur and identify at what time such anomalies took place? So such level of sophisticated workflows can be easily accomplished through a click of a few buttons in the Analytics 2.0 dashboard. So with that, kind of summarizing, we've achieved, with 6.0 feature parity with network packet brokers. There's a huge architectural advantage with SDN fabrics and the service nodes and analytics. And now we see an opportunity to innovate and lead the monitoring and security space with announcements such as BigSecure Architecture, container monitoring, and very high performance service nodes that, when clustered, can get terabit class service capacity. With that, Greg, over to you.
Fantastic, Prashant. Thank you so much for that detailed overview. We're looking now at the Q&A section, and so I wanted to open that up. There's a box on the side of your GoToWebinar where we welcome you to insert some of your questions. The copy of the slides will be sent, a link will be sent to everybody who's attended today. Several people have requested information about that. And let's see, we'll take a look at one particular question here, Prashant, for you. In the case of a DDoS attack where you want to mitigate at the egress points, i.e. upstream, by placing BigMon on premise, isn't that a bit too late?
So the BigMon deployment can occur in service provider environment where the traffic is ingested, or cloud environments. And so one would, we see that those are the organizations where such an architecture would be deployed. Enterprises can certainly do that, but as the viewer suggested, it can be later in the game. But certainly the idea is to place it at the front end of the attack.
Fantastic, great. Here's another question. Doug mentioned in passing this concept of our integration with hyper-converged solutions like vSAN. And is there any kind of plan in the future with our partnership with Dell and EMC to discuss support for the likes of vBlock?
I can start with that. So it's certainly a good question in terms of the evolving ecosystem. As I've mentioned previously, Dell is a close ally and strategic partner of ours. And with the acquisition of EMC, lends itself to new potential use cases and ways in which we can go to market together. When we look at vSAN, hyperconverged, that whole market, that's something that I believe is front of mind for Dell, and I think you can expect to see some integrations and some work that we'll do with Dell over the course of the next 6 to 12 months.
Fantastic. And here's another one for you, Prashant. In terms of going back to ESX, does the monitoring traffic inside an ESX host require a distributed switch?
What it would require is an ability to span. So distributed virtual switch certainly provides an ability to span, and any switch that provides an ability to span would allow traffic to be extracted from the server and sent to the monitoring fabric.
Fantastic, great. Let's see, and I think a final question here that we're looking at is a question around the use of Docker and containers. Let's see, real-world use case of Docker with, hosted with VMs? What's the kind of advantage of that deployment?
In fact, we earlier this week spoke to a customer who has deployed that. In fact, the demonstration that we have is based on that use case. And so what customers have found, many customers who have operational expertise in VMware environment and are preferring the operational characteristics of VM, the isolation characteristics of VM, are choosing to deploy Docker containers within that VMware ESX environment. And so we see two categories of customers, those who prefer to have that security and operational characteristics, and their teams are trained in that environment, choose to go that route. And then there are others who have team expertise and are more Linux oriented, focus on deploying containers directly on the bare metal host.
Great.
And our approach is to really be agnostic to these environments and provide extend monitoring, however way the customer is choosing to deploy their Docker containers.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. And John, the final question goes to you. What are the largest impediments that you're seeing for enterprises to adopt next generation networking technologies like SDN?
Really, the biggest impediment right now that we hear from most people is education and in their own people. So a lot of companies are starting down this path, but they realize I don't have the skill set in my employees, so I've got to start developing that skill set. I've got to look out into the market. Maybe there are partners, some of your partners who may already be primed, who have experience in these types of areas that can help customers through this. It's no different than when everybody started looking at going into cloud technologies. Nobody had a cloud expert on staff. And so for software-defined networking, software-defined data center, that expertise doesn't exist within most IT organizations. So you've got to look at, are there partners that I can lean on for that, and how do I help develop my people so that they see this as an opportunity to gain skills and not something that becomes a threat to their job.
Yeah, John, it's Doug. Just to add to that as well, in our discussions with customers and prospective customers, the biggest challenge that we see, and I think you're dead on, is one of culture. I think fundamentally, people, when they see the technology, they see the capabilities, it's something they genuinely want to embrace and they understand the value of. And yet at the same time, many of them are traditionalists in the sense that they've been building networks the same way for a long time. They're educated in a certain manner. And it becomes, how do you evolve the culture around them at the company to be able to use these new frameworks and architectures? And from what we see is that when you do break through and get those initial insertions in those customer environments, they embrace it, and from a cultural vantage point, it becomes quite pervasive.
Absolutely. One of the most interesting things that I've seen, if you look at AT&T, they've actually gone out and they've put the line in the sand. They've said, this is how much of our infrastructure is going to be virtualized by this date, and they're driving to that. So having a firm goal, laying it out for all your people and saying, this is the direction we're going, as opposed to, hey, this is something we're looking at, what do you think? I think that has a huge impact because it gets the organization to rally behind that goal. It's like sending a man to the moon by the end of the decade.
Exactly.
Great analogy. Yeah, and we're at the top of the hour here, and so I think one of the, to echo one of the things that Doug said, what we really highly encourage you to do is point your browser to labs.bigswitch.com, and we have 12 modules that are self-paced. You can actually go ahead and sign up, and you can experience this next generation networking firsthand without shipping any proof of concept gear. Allows you to get a sense of this very modern architecture, very intuitive CLI, as well as a next generation Web 2.0 UI with inbuilt analytics that really shows you a new way of doing networking that is dramatically different than the traditional approaches that you may be used to. That's a great way to start. We also would be happy to engage with you out in the field. So if you have any questions or you'd like to contact sales, please send the information to info@bigswitch.com. And with that, we thank you very much for joining us. Happy holidays, and we hope you have a safe one, and look forward to joining the webinar program that we run on a very frequent basis here at Big Switch by going to bigswitch.com/webinars. And with that, we'll wrap the session. Thank you very much.